Ghosts. There are no ghosts in Canada. The country is too new for ghosts. This striking statement appears in Susanna Moody's book, Roughing It in the Bush, that was published in 1852. The book documents her experience as an English settler in the colonial province of Upper Canada. Moody considers this land that is new to her, which she names the unpeopled wastes of Canada. She is, of course, referring to the local territories of Mississauga and Chippewa people that, since 1818, was subject to the Rice Lake Treaty. But such realities do not figure much in Moody's fantasy of new countries and unpeopled wastes. Some people look at archives for evidence. Archives for such people are places in which are stored the positive proofs of something. I am slightly envious of such people, precisely because I know I'm not one of them. There are no archives available for me to use. Instead of archives, I make do with ghosts. Ghosts are what I have to work with. Don't get me wrong, I have no need to prove Susanna Moody wrong and show that indeed there are ghosts in Canada. I have no need for that. What I do need to do, however, is listen to the intelligence of ghosts and what lessons ghosts have to teach me. This is my project here in Toronto. What is a ghost? A ghost, I propose, is a present absence. That is to say, a ghost is an absence that is experienced as a presence. And this is precisely what allows ghosts to haunt certain places. No, the ghost isn't here in this place as a positive presence that you and I can point to. But the sense that this place is haunted indicates that the ghost isn't quite absent here either. Being haunted by ghosts means that the very absence of ghosts is experienced as possessing its own kind of presence, a negative presence, as it were. Psychoanalytic theory has a name for this negative presence. It's called a lack. To lack something is different from the mere absence of something. Let me give you an example. It is a fact that I don't have a tail, but this does not mean that I lack one. The experience of my body, in other words, is not structured around the fact of this tail that I do not have. If I lack the tail, however, then my everyday embodied experience would be structured by this sense that I'm missing something, a tail. In this city, I feel a profound lack of historical continuity. The word unprecedented has gained much currency of late. And this word, unprecedented, I think to me signals this lack of historical continuity. That every new event appears as if it came out of nowhere and it disappears into nowhere. I wonder what function this has whenever we use the word unprecedented so often. In Toronto, with this lack of historical continuity, things feel ever new because things appear as if they were unprecedented. This is a selection of books about Toronto that I exhibited at Allen Gardens in 2015. A library of books showing how Toronto represented itself over many decades. Books that show a city changing in its built form, but also changing in the ways that it imagines itself to itself. The collection of books, this archive that I've assembled, surrounded a sculpture which I titled Sphinx, a figure symbolic of this city whose point of view is structured around its lack in terms of capital. The figure lacks a head, so the word capital refers to head. The figure lacks a head. I'll speak plainly. Here in Toronto, I lack an archive. I can certainly imagine a reasonable response. Louis, what are you talking about? There are plenty of archives here, which makes a lot of sense. There's the City of Toronto Archives up at 255 Spadina Road. There are important university archives like the ones here at UTM, at U of T, up at York. There are archives and museums like the AGO with its excellent artist files and institutional documentation. Nothing, in other words, is missing. what has presence is present. And you can pinpoint the presence of what is present in any number of archives. There are no ghosts here. I know I can't argue against this, and yet this fails to describe my experience of this city. In Toronto, in this city's lack of historical continuity, there are ghosts that haunt this place. In her 2005 novel, What We All Long For, Dionne Brand beautifully captures the thing I'm trying to describe. She writes, "There are Italian neighborhoods and Vietnamese neighborhoods in this city. There are Chinese ones and Ukrainian ones and Pakistani ones and Korean ones and African ones. Name a region on the planet and there's someone from there here. All of them sit on Ojibwe land, but hardly any of them know it or care, because that genealogy is willfully untraceable, except in the name of the city itself." I want to focus on that phrase, that genealogy is willfully untraceable. Genealogy is the study of history by means of family origins. I was born in Lima, Peru, and immigrated with my family to Toronto in 1981. So what does that mean, that fact of my biography mean, according to Dionne Brand? It means that this personal history of Louis Jacob is connected to a family origin that connects my presence here as a settler to the presence of Ojibwe or Anishinaabe people, who are also here whether I know about it or care about it. The home where I live sits on their land. Genealogy in this definition is clearly not the family origins of particular bloodlines, but rather genealogy is about the links that entangle us together within a colonial context. It is these links which have become willfully untraceable. By whose will, I wonder? The renowned sculptor David Reuben Pictocun died on January 22nd, just 3 weeks ago. In order to memorialize his work, Foyer, the AGO's online magazine, published an interview with the artist titled From Memory to Monument. This is a kind of screen grab of it. You can read it online if you're interested. So I'll read a little section from this interview. So the first question, Foyer, whoever's interviewing the artist, asks, "First, what does radical remembrance mean to you?" And Pictocun turns to his curator, Wanda Nanabush, and says, "Wanda?" And Wanda provides this answer. She says, "Radical means root." So we thought about how the artist had the residential school experience and then dislocation. Through his work, he does a lot of memory work, like remembering stories, connecting to the land, connecting to the animals. There is resistance in doing that memory work. Notice here that Wanda speaks of memory work as connecting, remembering stories, connecting to the land, connecting to the animals. Memory work, then, is the work of establishing genealogies, what I call the links that entangle us together within a colonial context. Indeed, following Wanda's answer, Pictocun immediately tells a story of colonization. This is what he says. "In my past, I've had a lot of trials and errors. I'm from the Western Arctic initially, a little village in the Western Arctic named Paulatuk. At a very early age, I was sent off to boarding school, so that was my first remembrance. I didn't know where I was going. They didn't explain anything to us children. There were about 10 of us just thrown onto a plane and off you go. I remember that we didn't have a clue about where we were going. I just heard the sound of the plane. It was a really loud drone sound. Eventually, I ended up in a little town called Aklavik. We were put into the Roman Catholic boarding school. That's my earliest recollection. It brought out a lot of hatred in me." And then Foyer asks, "What does it feel like to see the works from the early part of your career and the more recent ones here in one space?" In answering, I think Pictocun talks about the ways in which willful untraceability is produced. This is what he says. "At the boarding schools I went to, we were forced not to speak our language and to forget about the things that were customary to us. Basically, I see it as an education in forgetting. Forget who you are. Forget how to speak your language. the customary things you do, the traditional things. Forget all that. We're going to teach you a different way of life, a different way to speak, and a different way to look at the world. It was their way, not our way. There are still residual effects of that system. As I said, I realized it boils down to anger, frustration, and anxiety. I just do something with those feelings. Make it solid and turn it into stone. I can do something with it. Let the stone speak for me. So in the face of this education and forgetting, forget who you are, forget how to speak your language, the customary things you do, the traditional things, forget all that. So that the genealogies that entangle us as families and communities get broken and turn to nothing. In the face of this, the artist renders this very nothingness into something solid. He turns this forgetting into stone. Foye then asks, is there one sculpture that is the most meaningful to you, or do they all mean something to you? And Pictou answers, it's the most difficult one, the most stubborn, that I was battling for a long time. The better part of 2 years. It's titled Shaman in Flight. It's the memory of being abducted. I was on the plane hanging on. We didn't know where we were going, just into the unknown. So make it solid and turn it into stone. This is how one artist is able to deal with ghosts, by turning ghosts into stones and let the stones speak for him. In 2023, Wanda Nanabush curated the AGO exhibition Radical Remembrance, the Sculptures of David Ruben Pictou. It was an eye-opening exhibition featuring more than 60 sculptures spanning 50 years of the artist's work. And this exhibition was part of a larger process of change happening within the museum, which had started 5 years previously. So 5 years previously, in 2018, the AGO announced that the Department of Canadian Art, for decades a keystone of the museum, was being renamed as the J.S. McLean Center for Indigenous and Canadian Art. And this was due to Wanda's tireless advocacy for structural change within the institution. In her essay, Performing Sovereignty in the Museum, Wanda spoke about this decision to restructure the Department of Canadian Art. And this is what she says, this is what she wrote. Instead of creating a separate Indigenous art department, we decided to use a nation-to-nation model for a joint department where we shared power. It seems so simple. But the order, the sequence of Indigenous and Canadian art was extremely important. They, the AGO, said Canadian and Indigenous. I had to work to get that switched because we're first. We should always be first. It means that the land that we stand on, the sovereignty of that land is First Nation sovereignty. Canadian sovereignty derives its existence from ours. And she continues, I think museums never talk about sovereignty. We try to avoid it. Because museums are usually nationalist institutions meant to serve the nation state that is a colonial state. Less than a year after the opening of Pictou exhibition, the AGO announced the sudden departure. This is the museum's preferred euphemism. The departure of Wanda Nanabush after 7 years on the job. 4 days later, an email was leaked that linked her departure to attacks by people, including Sarah Angel, then a member of the AGO's Committee of Indigenous and Canadian Art. People who represented themselves as affiliates to something called the Israel Museums and Arts Canada, IMAC. The leaked IMAC email was addressed to AGO Director Stefan Jost, Wanda's boss, thus threatening her employment and livelihood. This rapid turn of events came as a seismic shock, the repercussions of which continue to be felt. And I hope folks have been reading the news that's circulating around additional acts of censorship within AGO committees. So what follows in terms of Wanda's departure is a matter of public record. You might be interested to check out this important article that was published in the Walrus magazine written by Jason McLean. But for my purposes here, I would like to consider what this episode tells us about the nature of an education in forgetting. The nature of things that become willfully untraceable. Pictou spoke of one technique used in Canada in order to render genealogies untraceable. He mentioned the use of residential boarding schools to break the links of Inuit and Indigenous people from their land, and to break the links of children from their families and communities. Such techniques are embedded in the very constitution of this place we call Canada, this country that is too new for ghosts. And the recent example of the AGR demonstrates another technique, the use of non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, to ensure that Wanda is legally forbidden ever to speak about the conditions of her departure. Think about this. The sole function of NDAs is to make genealogies willfully untraceable, and to render this untraceability something that is enforced by law. NDAs enforce an education in forgetting, embedded in the very constitution of this place we call Canada. I hope you now understand the meaning of that unreasonable claim with which I started my presentation, my claim that there are no archives available for me to use. Instead of archives, I may do with ghosts. Ghosts are what I have to work with. So as an artist, I've been asking myself, can we ever see erasure? Can we ever hear silencing? What stones do I, as an artist here in Toronto, have available in order to render non-disclosure as solid as a stone? During the past years, I've witnessed and experienced forms of violence in the arts community that I never imagined possible. As CARFAC, the Canadian Artists Representation, the Front des Artistes Canadiens, has recently noted, quote, "We are deeply concerned about the recent experiences of artists and arts administrators who have faced losses of opportunity, employment, and other consequences for demonstrating their perspectives on the violence in Gaza." What can I do? I acquired seismograph readings, the traces of shocks, taken at 3 Toronto locations within the Southern Ontario Seismic Network. These measurements were taken on 2 dates and include 2 precise times. 12:15 p.m. on November 16, 2023, when the departure of Wanda Nanabush, Curator of Indigenous Art, was announced, and also at 10:16 a.m. on January 10, 2024, when the departure of Taklarik Partridge, the museum's first Inuit curator, was announced. This work is titled The Stenographer, SOS. In this time of violence, I decided to become a stenographer. Stenography is a high-speed writing method using a specialized keyboard. Primarily used in courtrooms, stenography allows for real-time, verbatim transcriptions. In the face of NDAs, I let the earth speak for me about the things that cannot legally be spoken about, the things that are now willfully untraceable. In November 2023, immediately after the announcement of the departure of Wanda Nanabush, I took a series of photographs. I keep mentioning the departure of Wanda Nanabush. I hope this euphemism makes your stomach churn. One image from this series, the series is titled Moving the Museum, What Then Remains, depicts a finger pointing to a wall at the entrance of the AGO's Department of Indigenous and Canadian Art galleries. The wall once contained a text in Anishinaabe, English, and French, traces of which are still barely visible. A text that outlined the new department's nation-to-nation mandate. This text was removed following Wanda's departure, an act of erasure that is also a gesture of protest. What does this image depict? It's an image of a finger pointing at nothing. The finger, in other words, attempts to generate a sense of lack. It indicates the nothingness of a ghost that isn't there. I created a series of abstract paintings that featured only one color, tones of red, painted in oil on burlap. Burlap is a kind of crappy artist material. It's not fine linen, it's not a nice canvas. But this certain poverty of material, for me, belies a certain richness of depth. Some of the paintings were barricaded in the gallery. So here's an exhibition view at Mercer Union with some of the paintings barricaded with this fence, this construction site fence, which pressed the paintings against the wall. This is an image of Toronto police using the kettling tactic to surround protesters and bystanders. The image was taken at Queen and Spadina on June 27, 2010. It's a typical image of this kind of police technique. Red is the color that reveals itself when we close our eyes. And I encourage you to try this, like on a sunny day, go outside, look up at the sun and close your eyes. That's the red I'm talking about. Some of my paintings, collectively titled The Red Room, were installed on a wall at Mercer Union that I decided to cut with an incision. And the incision partially revealed an artwork by another artist, Dwayne Linklater, who had created it for his solo exhibition at Mercer Union 9 years previously in 2016. The incision is a kind of genealogy. Dwayne's work, titled What Then Remains from 2016, is a structural intervention into the wall. So he painted right into the wall studs, the metal wall studs of the wall. And the painting introduced a text questioning indigenous sovereignty of land and law, as well as legacy. This work has remained a part of Mercer Union ever since, living silently behind the drywall, invisibly behind the drywall for almost a decade. My gesture of cutting into the wall established what the on-brand would call a genealogy, a gesture enacted in a context of non-disclosure, an attempt to relink the continuities that our education in forgetting strives to break apart. Red is the color that reveals itself when we close our eyes. Red is the color of animal life, coursing deep within us. Red is beautiful. Red is the color that whitewashing innocently desires to erase. And red is what remains. Thank you very much.